Most systems fail because they're inefficient. China's problem is the opposite. It became too efficient, too optimized, too dependent on one way of growing, too good at doing the same thing over and over again. And when that kind of system hits its limits, it doesn't adjust smoothly. It keeps pushing in the same direction, even when that direction stops working. China didn't build a broken economy. It built one that worked exactly as designed. A machine engineered for speed, scale, and relentless cost compression. For decades, that machine delivered results that stunned the world. Hundreds of millions lifted from poverty. Cities assembled almost overnight. An industrial base so vast that it didn't just compete in global trade. It reshaped the rules of global trade itself. But here's the thing about machines built for one purpose. They don't know when to stop. And right now in 2026, that machine isn't slowing down. It's accelerating into a wall. All right, let's break it down. To understand what's breaking, we first need to understand what was built and how deliberately it was constructed. China's economic transformation didn't begin with some grand free market revolution. It began with a controlled experiment. In the late 1970s, after decades of Maoist upheaval, a group of farmers in Shaogang village quietly divided collective land among households. And then suddenly, output surged. The lesson was simple. You give people a stake in the outcome and they produce more. Beijing noticed, and rather than open the floodgates, it did something far more strategic. It created test zones. By 1980, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Shantou were designated as special economic zones built to trial "special policies and flexible measures without risking the broader system." The idea was elegant. You isolate a space, suspend certain rules, measure success in growth and exports, and if it worked, you'd replicate it everywhere. Shenzhen became the poster child. In 1979, it was a fishing settlement of roughly 30,000 people near Hong Kong. Within 3 decades, it exploded into a mega city of over 10 million. Researchers have described it as an instant city. Growth so rapid that it risked becoming a victim of its own success. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. But the factories and export zones were only what you could see from the outside. Underneath there was something far more powerful. Institutional architecture. A set of hidden mechanics that made the whole system run. And once you understand these mechanics, you're going to understand why the machine became so hard to stop. First, there was labor. China's hook system. Its household registration framework controlled who could access public services and where. In practice, it allowed the state to mobilize one of the largest movements of people in modern history. By the end of 2025, China had more than 300 million migrant workers with 180 million working away from their home regions. That's a labor force larger than the entire population of Bangladesh, moving where the machine needed them when the machine needed them. Second, there were the local governments. After tax reforms in 1994, local officials found themselves with more spending obligations than revenue. The solution? Sell land to developers. Compete for investment, and demonstrate growth at all costs. GDP became a performance metric, and local leaders were rewarded for delivering it. Academic research has documented how career incentives and tournament-style competition between cities drove officials to chase growth numbers, sometimes even manipulating statistics to look good. And third, you had investment, massive, sustained, and relentless. In 2024, gross capital formation still sat at around 41% of GDP, roughly double the rate of most developed economies. When demand is strong, that level of investment fuels productivity. When it weakens, it becomes a pipeline of excess. The machine wasn't accidental. It was constructed, labor made mobile but controlled. Local governments incentivized to build and finance structure to keep capital flowing, even when the return started to fade. But here's where things start to turn. Because a machine that can't stop building eventually builds too much. And what happens next is something that economists have studied for decades, but rarely at this scale. Overcapacity isn't just too many factories. It's a mismatch. Supply that outstrips what buyers can absorb at prices that make a profit. And in a system where shutting down production threatens jobs, debt repayments, and political careers, firms don't stop when the market tells them to. They keep running. They cut prices. They fight for survival rather than for innovation. The Chinese have a word for this, nuan. Often translated to involution. It originally described agricultural societies where more effort produced no more output. Are locked in a death spiral of price cutting and overproduction where competition doesn't drive progress. It drives everyone closer to collapse. The Federal Reserve Bank has described it as, quote, disorderly price competition linked to overinvestment and producer price deflation enabled by zombie lending. Banks rolling over debts to avoid recognizing losses. Now, we've seen earlier versions of this cycle play out. After the massive stimulus of 2008, China's steel production exploded from around 100 million metric tons in 1996 to 627 million by 2010. When growth slowed, capacity utilization crashed below 70% in 2015. Coal followed the same pattern, dropping from above 90% utilization to around 65%. Both sectors accumulated enormous corporate debt. The government responded with supply-side reforms, shutting mines, closing zombie factories, forcing capacity reductions. It was economic triage on a national scale. But here's what makes the current era different and far more dangerous. The overcapacity hasn't stayed in old. Migrated into the technologies the world actually needs. Solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles. The same machine that once flooded global markets with cheap steel is now flooding them with cheap green technology. And the numbers behind that shift, they're staggering. But we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. Let's start with solar. China invested over $50 billion in solar manufacturing capacity since 2011. Roughly 10 times of what Europe spent. Today, China controls more than 80% of every key stage of solar panel production from polysilicon to finished modules. That dominance helped slash solar costs worldwide, making one of the cheapest electricity sources on the planet. But dominance came at a brutal price. By early 2025, solar module prices had crashed to historic lows, between 7 and 9 cents per watt, down from 25 cents in 2021. Manufacturers weren't just competing, they were hemorrhaging cash. In the first half of 2025, the top 4 Chinese module manufacturers posted combined losses of $1.54 billion. Some of the biggest names in the industry, Geno Solar, LONGi, JA Solar. They collectively shipped over 100 gigawatts of modules yet saw revenues collapse by 15 to 36%. Polysilicon prices stayed below production cost for over a year with at least 4 producers suspending operations entirely. Module operating rates among leading manufacturers dropped from 55 to 60% by mid-2025. China's own government stopped calling it overcapacity. The preferred term became irrational competition. In July of 2025, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology summoned 14 major solar companies to an emergency meeting, urging them to stop the bleeding and align production with actual demand. Batteries tell the same story on a different scale. Lithium-ion battery prices have collapsed over the past 15 years, falling from around $800 per kilowatt-hour to just $84 per kilowatt-hour in China in 2025, with some stationary storage cells hitting as low as $36. China holds roughly 83% of global battery production capacity. But in 2023, excluding portable electronics, Chinese factories used less than 40% of their maximum output. By 2025, projected capacity had ballooned to 4,800 gigawatt-hours, roughly 4 times actual demand from EV makers. That's one of the most severe overcapacity situations in modern industrial history. And electric vehicles, well, China accounted for just under 60% of all new electric car registrations globally in 2023, with 8.1 million sold, up 35% from the year before. That was also the first year that China's EV industry operated without national purchase subsidies, meaning the market was supposed to stand on its own. But instead, the IEA described it as entering a phase of increased price competition and consolidation. High levels of overcapacity have slashed producer margins and now threaten firms that can't find customers beyond China's borders. The battery supply chain is even more vertically integrated in China than in the West, which sounds like an advantage until you realize that integration means losses cascade through every link in the chain simultaneously. Hey, if you're finding this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. We go deep on the forces that are reshaping global power every week here on Fall of Nations. Now, here's the paradox at the heart of all of this. China has genuinely won the green technology race. It makes the panels, the batteries, the cars. It's driven costs down for the entire planet. But winning that race while destroying profitability isn't a victory. It's a trap. Because when margins collapse, companies can't reinvest. When companies can't reinvest, innovation stalls. And when government has to step in to keep bleeding industries alive, well, the who